Following the Memorial Day death of George Floyd, law enforcement came under fierce national scrutiny, with protests calling for the defunding and reevaluation of police departments. Soon after the incident, Minnesota State Mankato President Richard Davenport instructed the university's law enforcement program to review its curriculum. Dr. Pat Nelson, department head for the government department at Minnesota State Mankato and director of the law enforcement program, said the president's directive came after changes were already underway. Downsizing its hands-on skills emphasis, greater attention was placed on theory, communication, and critical thinking.
So we had already been making changes to our curriculum to kind of dive deeper into history and relations with diverse populations, communications, interacting with people on a personal level and humanizing them. We'd already been doing that because you can practice that skill stuff right at the end and do very well. But if you don't have your process and your decision making and your legal precedents in place, all of your skills don't matter at that point. If you don't know why you're doing it, or if you could be doing it or should be doing it, it doesn't matter if you can do it. So we've been already doing that. With the incident in Minneapolis in May, the president asked us to do a review of our programs. And we did something very unique, something we've never done before, is we invited outside professionals and community members to let us know what they think. You know, come in and review our programs, not just from an academic lens, but from interactions and what do they expect law enforcement officers and criminal justice professionals to get as part of their academic training. We wanted to ask, you know, do we provide the right academics to make sure our students can work and function and live in a multicultural, diverse society? That was our whole question right there. And we asked people to look at it that are not used to looking at curriculum. And we invited the community in to give their opinions on what we are offering and what we should be offering. And then we put a work group together to make some recommendations on what we can do to enhance our curriculum and our programs here at MSU. But one of the recommendations is, well, let's get history involved, you know, the history department involved. Let's get gender and women's studies involved, ethnic studies, sociology, that will be teaching about the same things from a different perspective. So you have multiple ways of looking at things. And that's something we think is important as critical thinkers. Some other recommendations were some more service learning and interactions with the communities, you know, getting our students out in the community when they're not responding. So before they're in a response role and interacting with people to see, you know, they're living lives and have families and have the same issues as everybody else, but they might be impacted differently.
Nelson said 5 pivotal points will be implemented as the department revises its law enforcement program. 2 will deal with curriculum changes, and 3 with having the program structures to best support the curriculum.
And looking at fall 2021 is when we'd like to already see some of the changes taking place.
Drawing upon her own experiences, Nelson said systemic racism is a part of the criminal justice system. It should be the role of law enforcement instruction that provides the tools for change.
I have prior experience, you probably can see behind me my badges on the wall, that once I got into academics and having some deeper conversations, it made me kind of sit back and think, you're right, we are doing this. There are systems of racism that are being enforced where you may not have individuals that are purposely doing it because of a person's race, but they're following along with a system that is oppressing Black and brown people, especially young males. So, right. You know, law enforcement is part of the systematic racism that is embedded in the United States, just like the entire criminal justice system is, because if you look at the history, that's kind of how it got started, and we keep perpetuating it. So it is important that we do our best to try to at least let our students know that this is going on. That they are going to end up being a part of it unless there's a huge system change, which takes a lot of time, and maybe things that they can do to acknowledge it or combat it or even speak up against it if they have the opportunity to do that.
Law enforcement instruction also factors in the lifting of stereotypes.
The second day of my class, I always ask them, what does the ideal police officer look like? It's a loaded question. You know, it's always a trap, right? Because there is no ideal police officer. And if they're sitting in my class, a law enforcement class at the upper division, almost ready to graduate, my second question to them is, if your image did not pop into your head, why not? Why are you not the ideal police officer? We have a lot of media images about police. We have a lot of media images about law enforcement officers, specialty units, FBI, you name it. But most of those are inaccurate because there isn't an ideal one. That's why there is no height requirement. That's why there is no weight requirement. That's why anybody can be a law enforcement officer, because your most important tool is your brain. It really is. And your second most important tool is your communications, because you can talk to somebody, but if your brain's not working, then it can really go downhill. The actual physical interactions that you have in law enforcement are very low, right? I mean, if you watch TV, you're fighting with somebody every day, and then you're shooting them every other week, and then you're in car chases, actually very low, even in very busy departments. So that's why I load them up with that question. And we spend a whole semester kind of circling around that. And at the end, when I ask them again, what does the ideal police officer look like, or who in the room, where you hopefully are getting to the point where they're all pointing to themselves. And so our goal is to work on those stereotypes and expose our students to people of different cultures, diversities, socioeconomic classes, maybe experiences, immigrants versus non-immigrants, so that when they start encountering them as a law enforcement officer, that this is not the first time you have encountered somebody who is maybe an American Indian or a Native American or somebody who's Asian American, so that oh, they're a person, right? They're not the stereotype that I saw on TV or that I heard about. They're a person, and treat them as a person.
Nelson said psychological screening of police officers is currently conducted, and added that the results can never be 100% conclusive.
Bring that up because all law enforcement officers in Minnesota go through psychological exams. They go through a basic psychological exam to get into the skills portion. And then when they're hired, they have to go through a more in-depth one, right? So we do have some screening, but I would almost guarantee anybody you go talk to, especially in the field of psychology or assessment, would tell you there's no way to screen for every instance, right? So you can have an officer that's working for years and years and years, and then nothing happens, and then they have an incident. And you don't know all the stressors behind it. You don't know what's going on in their life. I mean, there's not a way to really screen for that. You can screen for consistent behavior, but one-time behavior is really difficult. And it could be different type of behavior. I mean, you could see an officer might have a bias against a specific race, and you're low level seeing that all the way through, and then there's an incident. Well, that's where their supervisor needs to be stepping in when they start hearing about the low level. Versus if it's a one-time incident. Then we look at what training did they just get out of? Did something change in what's been going on in their shift, in their assignment, in their personal lives? So there is screening. Whether there could be better screening or more screening, it's a possibility, but you're never going to be able to 100% guarantee somebody is not going to act on their biases.
Nelson said the role of education in shaping good law enforcement officers starts with shaping good human beings.
You take off the uniform or you take somebody out of their profession, they're still a human. So we basically strive to create good humans that are involved in their community, they're involved in their lives. And then we add that professional layer on them, but they still need to be human. Nobody is Superman. We don't actually have superheroes like people have special powers. Everything that we have is given to us by the community to be a law enforcement officer. That's where our authority comes from. And yes, there are people that should not be law enforcement officers. And we really should eventually get to the standard where we don't even accept that there's a bad apple or two, because there shouldn't be, right? Because we hear that a lot, that, oh, it's just one or two bad apples. Well, we should get to the standard that we don't have bad apples. Is it going to take work? Absolutely. But it's a profession in progress. It always will be. It's based on community expectations, and we do our best to help our students realize, A, if they're going into the right field, and B, how to remain a person and be a police officer or law enforcement officer at the same time.